Welcome to Cinema's Underbelly, the channel where we dive into the deepest, darkest trenches of the underground to analyze and review the most obscure, obscene, and controversial films that cinema has to offer. I'm your host, Jonathan Doe, and today we will be reviewing the Texas Chainsaw Massacre original franchise. In 1974, Tobe Hooper released the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, a picture now recognized as being the first of the 1970s slasher films and pioneering what would be eventually recognized as the golden age of the slasher genre, with the film's antagonist, Leatherface, becoming one of the most well-known villains in cinema history. The film centers on a group of 5 youths as they venture up to a family cabin in rural Texas. Upon reaching their destination, the group of friends slowly begins being picked off one by the Sawyer clan, a family of cannibals residing in one of the neighboring homes. Despite the film's premise, it actually contains no scenes of gore and only a sparing few instances of on-screen blood. Regardless, the film was banned in countries all over the world during its initial release, with Linda Gross of the Los Angeles Times calling the film despicable. But as time passed and the hysteria and sensitive sensibilities of the mainstream media began to dwindle, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre began to gain attention from the film and art community. In 1990, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre was inducted into the Horror Hall of Fame, and it is now part of the permanent collection of New York City's Museum of Modern Art. And in 2012, the film was named by the British Film Institute as one of the 250 greatest films of all time. In 1986, Tobe Hooper released The Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2, a sequel which takes a more comedic tone than the much more serious original title. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2 focuses on a radio host named Stretch, who becomes the latest target for Leatherface and his cannibal family. The film also introduces the new character Chop Top, played by Bill Moseley, who we find out is a member of the Sawyer family, but was over in Vietnam during the events that took place in the first film. Much like the first Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the sequel was also faced with controversy after its initial release, being banned in countries all over the world. Though many of these bans would be lifted, the film remained banned in Australia for 20 years. When news that illegal copies were leaked into the country, a number of retailers were raided for possessing copies of the film, with the duplication house who manufactured the bootlegs being raided by federal customs, which is quite funny considering that by today's standards, the film is quite tame. In 1980, director Jeff Burr released Leatherface, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 3, a film that again centers on young kids finding themselves in rural Texas being hunted down by chainsaw-wielding Leatherface. As the title suggests, Leatherface is the center focus of this picture, and though this film does not shy away from the violence that Leatherface can bring, this picture is probably my least favorite out of the series. Its story feels weak, and there are no characters interesting enough to maintain my attention. In 1997, Kim Henkel released The Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Next Generation. Originally released in 1994 under the title The Return of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the film was shelved after its initial release, only to be recut and re-released 3 years later under the title that we know it as today. Starring Renee Zellweger and Matthew McConaughey, Next Generation centers on a group of teenagers who find themselves stranded on prom night in rural Texas and end up wandering into the old farmhouse where Leatherface and the rest of the Sawyer clan reside. As you could guess, things get out of hand, not only for the characters, but essentially the film itself, which is partly why this film has gained somewhat of a cult following. It's a far step away from the charm of the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but essentially, this film created a charm of its own, with just how absurd it gets at times. I don't want to say too much to spoil anything, but I will say, keep an eye out for Matthew McConaughey's robotic legs. There are some pretty fun and cult favorite moments in each one of these sequels. That said, not one of them holds up to the perfection that is the original. The first Texas Chainsaw Massacre is not only a masterful horror film, it's a masterful film. it can easily exist as a standalone feature and hold its own weight. This doesn't mean that the sequels aren't worth checking out. In fact, they can be a lot of fun. It's just that the original has always left me feeling so satisfied that I've never really found a reason for any sequels to exist. And because of this, when I think about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I rarely think of any other film except for the original. As always, thank you for watching, and if you like this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and share. Till next time, this is Cinema's Underbelly.